McAvoy. I'm the Teen Services Coordinator for St. Louis County Library. Our event today is part of the St. Louis Teen Book Festival, sponsored by St. Louis County Library, HEC Media, and the Novel Neighbor Bookstore. Hosting over 39 of the hottest young adult writers, the St. Louis Teen Book Festival is 11 days of programming dedicated to connecting teen readers with a diverse group of popular writers. You can order all of our authors' books from our indie bookstore partner, The Novel Neighbor, at thenovelneighbor.com, and they are offering special discounts if you purchase a bundle of all the featured books on this panel. Today, I am joined by 4 authors in contemporary young adult literature: Julie Buxbaum, Maria Padian, Samantha Mabry, and Nicole Melleby. Our authors' new books all feature the ups and downs of family life, parents who just don't understand, siblings we love to hate, and the many ways we have to continually negotiate and rebuild our family ties. So I thought we'd start by giving each of our guests a few minutes to tell us a little bit about each of their books. So Julie, would you like to start with telling us about Admission?
Sure. Admission is about Chloe Wynn Berenger, who at first glance seems to have her life in order. She just got into the college of her dreams. Her B-list actress mom is on the way to the B+ list, and she just got asked to prom by the boy she's had a crush on since middle school. So everything is going swimmingly well until one day the FBI come and knock on her door early in the morning to arrest her mother in a nationwide college admissions scandal. The book is inspired by the real college admission scandal, though it is 100% fiction. And it's all about family, but it's really a deep dive into complicity.
All right. Maria, would you like to go next?
Sure. The story I'm going to talk about today is called How to Build a Heart. And it's a story about a girl named Izzy Crawford. And Izzy is, when the story opens, she's 16 years old. And she and her mom and her little brother are living in a fairly rundown mobile home park in a place called Clayton, Virginia. And it's a story about finding permanence, finding home, and finding family. Because one of the problems that Izzy has is that her father, who was a veteran, died in combat in Iraq, and she and her mom and her little brother had been moving from place to place for a number of years now, looking for good jobs, good home, a place that they can take root. One of the challenges is that there don't seem to be family around to help them. Izzy's mom is from Puerto Rico, and all of her family is there, and they seem to have lost touch with her dad's family from North Carolina. The good news is that they've just been chosen by Habitat for Humanity to build a house in Clayton, which should be the realization of a whole bunch of dreams for Izzy. However, Izzy has secrets. They've been struggling financially, and Izzy for a long time has kept the fact of their poverty a secret from her friends, from other people that she comes in contact with. There's a lot of shame for some reason attached to her about her poverty. And now that they've been chosen as a Habitat family, all of the publicity that comes with building a Habitat house is about to come out. And she's suddenly realizing all the secrets that she's been wrapping herself in. They're going to have the light shone on them, not only in her community at large through all the PR that comes, but also the new guy that she's starting to date, the friends that she's made at the high school where she goes. And so she has to really come to grips with who she is and when she's ready to step into the light of her identity and her family.
Right, thank you. Samantha?
So this is a paperback. It comes out later this month of Tigers Not Daughters, my most recent novel. And it is about 3 sisters in a neighborhood of San Antonio called Southtown. And a year prior to the start of the novel, their oldest sister, Anna, has died falling from her window. She's trying to sneak out of her house, and she fell to her death. And so for the last year, the 3 sisters have been trying to process their grief in various terrible ways. And they then realize on the anniversary of their sister's death that their house is haunted, and they think that it's their sister, and they're trying to figure out why she has come back. So it's told in alternating points of view from each of the living sisters, and then also a chorus of boys who live across the street who are somewhat obsessed with the sisters in this house.
Right, thank you. And Nicole.
Yeah, so my book is in the role of Brie Hutchens, and Brie is a 14-year-old who, she's a Catholic school student. She loves soap operas. She wants to be an actress, and she has a complicated relationship with her mom that's made even more complicated when Brie realizes that she has a crush on another girl, and in the face of her mom's faith and kind of how they are already always butt heads, and so Brie's not really sure what to make of that. And it's one of those things where to kind of hide the fact that, she's accidentally looking at, she comes across naked pictures of her favorite soap opera star online, and she's, looking at these pictures, and her mom walks in, and the moment her mom walks in, she quickly exits out, and to kind of distract her mom from noticing anything weird, she blurts out that she'd been chosen to crown Mary in this big Catholic ceremony that they have, the May crowning, which she has not been chosen to do. She's probably won't be chosen to do. No one has been chosen yet, but she's definitely not top of that list because it goes to, a top student, which Brie is not. So throughout the course of the novel, she's kind of struggling to kind of get her mom to see her as, who she is and love her for who she is, all the while maintaining a whole bunch of lies to kind of try and stay under the radar, but Brie's not really an under the radar kind of girl. So,
all right. Well, thank you. So now we'll just jump into some questions. So the first one, it's for everyone. Each of these stories deals with family in a different way: single parent households, two parents, poverty, wealth. How much did your own family experiences factor into writing these stories? And Julie, if you want to kick us off.
Sure. With the college admission scandal, when it first broke, I became completely and totally obsessed. I was actually 2/3 of the way through writing a totally different book, and I put it aside to write this one. And I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out what made me so obsessed with it. I'm a parent of 2 kids. I have an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old. And when the scandal hit, it seemed like everything, all the media focus was on the parents. And who they are and why they made this decision, right? And there wasn't very much focus on the kids themselves. And I wanted to dig deep into the idea of a certain kind of parenting where, on one hand, these parents are telling their children they deserve everything in the whole wide world, right? And on the other hand, they're telling their kids they don't have to do anything. They're not capable of earning it themselves. They don't have the capability. They need to cheat to get there. And what are those dual messages of ultra privilege, entitlement, and teaching your kids they're incapable? What kind of kids do those produce? And so I was interested almost from a parenting perspective, how our culture at large is forming kids and forming a whole new generation. And so I think that's sort of how my family influenced the writing of the book. Obviously, I have not cheated my kids' way into school. But I do think these ethical questions sort of plague me as a parent continually, right? Like there are all these ways in which we live up to the line of legality, in a system in which we tell ourselves that like it takes a village, right? But really we're pitting the village against each other. And it comes up all the time, even now, even with little kids, the ways in which we have to choose between our kids or the larger community. And so I think that's why I was so fascinated by this. It wasn't inspired by my family, but it was inspired by all the sort of moral issues that come into being an ethical parent, which sometimes feels impossible.
Julie, can I jump in? Because I teach at like an elite university, like the type of college that maybe a student like that would go to. And I think there's always interesting discussions about like, are these adults who we should treat professionally and hold to professional standards, or are they children who need our help and we need to follow up and we need to be like, why aren't they in class today? And I think that we don't really know. It was like some weird thing in between that we're sort of trying to figure out.
And I think the parents aren't treating them as adults, right? The parents still see them as children, and I'm not sure when they let their kids become adults. Right. And so as a parent, I've been sort of thinking about all this stuff.
Yeah, because they think that they have to do so much that the kids can't do it on their own. And
exactly.
Yeah. Maria?
So I would say of all my books, this one probably I drew from family more than any other book. Because like Izzy in How to Build a Heart, I'm the daughter of 2 cultures, my Irish fathers and my Latina mothers. And while that animated our family with a whole host of accents and great traditions and some really unusual food pairings, like in my house, it wouldn't have been strange to have a dinner of arroz con pollo followed by a hunk of Irish soda bread. It also left me feeling adrift. I look nothing like my blonde-haired, blue-eyed father, and I struggle to speak my mother's first language, which is Spanish. So growing up sometimes felt like having a guest pass to a club that I couldn't really belong to. And I always had a sneaking suspicion whenever I would try to step into one identity or another that I was a little bit of a fraud. And those were some of the feelings that I channeled when I was creating the character of Izzy. I would say that I think all teens search for their community, try to find their voice and their sense of self. But I think for the children of immigrants or the children of blended racial and cultural identity, that journey can be even more complicated. So for me, writing this book and taking this journey with Izzy surprised me in some ways that I didn't expect. And it challenged me. It got me talking to my mother a lot about some stories from her growing up that I was able to wind into the book. And ultimately, what I realized is that there's a phrase that my mother used all the time when I was growing up that I thought was just hers. And it was dime con quién andes y te diré quién eres, which is tell me who your friends are and I'll tell you who you are. And the story is bookended with that phrase that I had grown up with, hearing from my mother. And what ultimately it helped me to understand with it wasn't just your identity is who you're hanging out with, but it's also that family and identity is not an accident of birth or fate. It's something that we build. And so that was kind of my own family experience that I tried to weave into this novel.
Okay, thank you. And Samantha?
Right. So I based these three sisters on my mother and her sisters. So my mother comes from a kind of big Mexican-American family. She was born in Mission, Texas, which is a border town, and then moved to Dallas. So I set this in San Antonio. I just wanted I've never been to Mission. I've been to San Antonio. And so I wanted a city with a pretty enmeshed Tejano or Mexican American culture. And my mom and her sisters do not speak to each other like as adult women. And they have always had kind of a pretty fractured relationship. So I was really interested in trying to just like set them as young people who just essentially live in the same house together. They are sisters in name only. They're united somewhat by their intense love of their older deceased sister and their hatred of their father. They live with their father. So loosely based on, there's no ghosts in my mother's, history with her sisters, but really sort of loosely based on this idea of three young people who are not each other's friends and like don't even really kind of end up that way. They can unite a little bit at the end, but then I also have them go their own ways as well.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And Nicole?
Yeah, so this was definitely my most personal book. And, for a lot of different reasons, it's 100%, based on a lot about, my relationship with my own mom and, when I came out to her and kind of what I needed and what she was able to give me and the shortcomings there. But, Brie's a Catholic school student. I was a Catholic school student. My mom was actually the teacher at my Catholic school. So we had that extra dynamic that Brie luckily does not have. But, a big part of Brie Hutchens is she loves soap operas, and it's kind of the one thing that like her and her mom do together every afternoon. They sit and watch these soap operas together. And that was something that my mom and I always did. My mom, she's a teacher, so we both came home at the same time. Would sit down and watch the afternoon soaps. I'm doing my homework. She's doing her lesson plans. We're in the same space, kind of just sharing that together. And it's definitely something that I wanted to give Brie and her mom, especially as they explore then these more complicated aspects of, Brie doesn't really understand why her mom feels so strongly about her faith, and I never really got on board as strongly as my mom did either. So, you know, to add all that coming out, everything that comes along with that, plus the faith, plus, you know, they already butt heads a lot because Brie is, you know, she's over dramatic. She's, you know, very stubborn and strong willed. And, you know, her mom's also this, you know, stubborn and has her own views, and they butt heads all the time about that sort of stuff to begin with. So just to add everything else to the mix, definitely comes straight from, you know, my relationship with my parents and our family for sure.
Thank you. So now I have a question for each of you that kind of is more specific to your book, which Julie, you've kind of already answered my question.
Sorry.
No. Your book was it's very like ripped from the headlines. Like all of this just it's still unfolding, and people are still serving time for this Varsity Blues scandal. So you kind of touched on what drew you to the news story, and what compelled you to write Chloe's story, to write it the way that you did, to depict her the way that you did.
Yeah, so when the scandal broke, as I said, I was totally fascinated. But what was interesting to me is not sort of the guilt of the parents. I used to be a lawyer, and so the legal side was sort of easy to tackle. I already had the setting because Tell Me Three Things is set at this sort of super fancy pants private school, my first YA. And so I had this already natural setting. But what I wanted to look at is Chloe's guilt, right? So from page one, we know her mom did it. There's never a question of whether her mom is guilty. But having read the actual complaint in real life, the degree of culpability of the kids ranges wildly. Like there's some kids whose parents really, really did not want them to know. And there are some kids whose parents were, you know, including them in the decisions to cheat. And then there were a wide range of kids in the middle. And so from page one, we know that Chloe's mom did it, but we don't know what Chloe knew and when. And that's the animating question of the book, for me at least. And so I structured it with a now and then format where each chapter goes back and forth. So, you know, we start with the FBI coming to her door when the scandal broke. And then we go back in time and we watch the fall as she applies to college. Now, if I just had written it literally from the fall to the spring, it would have been a boring story. Just a girl applying to college where some weird things happen and then it explodes, right? But going back and forth, we start to watch Chloe's understanding. And I think what's most interesting to me is that gray area of knowing and not knowing. And all the times in our lives we choose not to know because not knowing serves us, and the privilege of not knowing serves us. And so that's the playground I wanted to play in. And that's where the book came from for me.
Yeah, I really liked how you went the back and forth, because it's very exciting, that first chapter, because she just thinks, oh, it's her new eyeshadow palette. And no, it's the FBI. It really draws you into the whole story. So Maria, my question for you is, so much of Izzy's story is about belonging and finding her place, but she also guards so much of her life. Sometimes guarding her secrets have led to her making unfavorable decisions. How was it to write a character your audience might not always agree with because of her decisions?
You mean like the unlikable character or the unlikable decisions?
Yeah, she's not unlikable the entire time, but she makes some decisions that the audience might be like, why would you do that? You're hurting your family.
Yeah, or one of the decisions too, and it's interesting because I recall, isn't it interesting too, because once you're done with the book, you remind yourself, where did this all get started? At least for me, like a book is all these different threads, and then I have to kind of bring it all together and like wind it into a rope, and I have to look way back and say, oh, that's where I started. But she has a friendship with a really problematic friend, which gets back into the, dime con quien andes. And her friend is true blue, but problematic. And in the story, I have her really on the cusp of, do I cut this friend or do I stay with this friend? What are the choices I make about who I surround myself with and how I ultimately define myself? And when I had my alpha readers looking at this book, they were really mad at me. And they said, we don't like Izzy's choice. She ditches Roz. How could she do that? And people had such a strong reaction to it. And I had no problem with her cutting Roz. And I thought, what is this saying about me? And I changed it. I changed it based on the conversations that I had with my readers and with a conversation I had with myself, which is I thought, how much do people get second chances? How forgiving are you? How forgiving do you want to be in this story? What makes sense? And I feel like ultimately by listening to some of the folks who were giving me that feedback and confronting it myself too, it's a better book. It's a better book. It's a more compassionate book and a more redemptive book as a result of looking at some of those choices that she could have made, particularly in terms of, and again, I think this is something that teenagers have to deal with all the time. Who do you keep? Who do you shed? What do you do? Julie, I was really caught up in that in your book, particularly because you give us the before and the after, we get to see the friendships and how your character was developing all the way through. So when this crisis hits and you wonder, what is she going to lose? And it makes her losses that much tougher. It makes it that much poignant. I could feel my own heart in my chest as I thought, is there going to be any forgiveness here? What redemptive action is possible? So yeah, that was great.
It's interesting you said I had a totally similar thing happen where I had a beta reader tell me they didn't like part of my ending. And I'm not going to spoil, but there is this sort of break that happens between my main character and someone else. And they did not want that break to happen. And I felt so strongly that it had to happen. And so I didn't listen to my beta reader.
But I feel like it's real life. Like it's a real thing that happens. And so to have it in the book, you don't want it all to be sugar coated and have a happily ever after. So, all right. So Samantha, in Tigers Not Daughters, you have a very interesting story structure in that each sister tells part of the story, but there's also the story is told from people looking in, like the group of boys across the street at Hector's house. What made you want to structure the story in this way?
I originally wanted it to be, there's this book called The Virgin Suicides, which is completely told in first person plural from a group of boys across the street, but it's in past tense, like they're older and they're like recounting. And I feel like always loved that structure. But I was thinking about the oldest sister who has passed away and how I was trying to get this, I don't want to say message across, but and so I wanted this character, like the almost the main character to be Anna, who is not alive in the book, but who has all these stories spun around her. And then we still don't know who she is, even though we have a lot of descriptions of who she is. I also just liked these sisters. I really did not want to write it this way, you guys. Like I did not think, let me have 4 narrators and one of them is a chorus. Like I was like, this is so ridiculous. Like I would just write the story. But then it ended up being what it did. And I liked all the sisters. They're all a little bit strange. And they were not super hard to get different, which I think is tricky. Sometimes if you have more than one narrator, they kind of can have this tendency of being the same person, basically. And so again, it wasn't my intention at first. And then I was really trying to, like I said, have them all revolve around this absent person. And that's what made it all kind of come together.
And in the way that you wrote it, they all have a very distinct voice that even if you like stop in the middle of a chapter, you know whose story you're hearing because it'll say at the top which sister it is or if it's the chorus. But I felt like each one was very distinct in how they were written. So thank you.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So Nicole, and you've touched on this a little bit, but why have Brie be a super fan of soap operas? Like I remember when I was a kid, every single network had at least 3 soap operas on at a time. And now there's only 4 on daytime TV at all.
Yeah.
And also yours is kind of 2 parts. How much research went into writing those short synopsis before every chapter?
Yeah, so I knew I wanted Brie to, she wants to be an actress. She's a very overdramatic person herself. And all of that to me just spoke to soap operas. I felt like, there was a natural kind of line between Brie and soaps. But also, I did draw so much from my relationship with my mom that kind of naturally happened as well. And, the book, there's a lot that I took from her. The very beginning where, she's just looking up pictures of her favorite soap opera actress, and she didn't know that her favorite soap opera actress had done Playboy. And those are the first pictures that come up. And, that's something that's drawn like directly from my own life back when I was still kind of figuring things out. So, everything just kind of fit together. And then the more soaps made sense to put in, the more I just wanted to elevate that and really like bring it in, even though, my audience might not really know much about soap operas, especially because so many of them have been canceled and, there's only so many left and it's kind of a dying breed. But I thought, I could make it as fun as possible for my audience anyway, and kind of introduce them to these wild stories. And going off of that, so each chapter starts with a brief little soap opera scene from a real soap, and the soap opera title and the year that it aired. And some of them I knew exactly what I wanted to use, what scenes, because they correspond with various chapters. So, it starts off with, they're just, scenes of these overdramatic women, strong but overdramatic women in soap operas, and kind of their, essential moments and scenes that take place. And then when Brie accidentally, comes out to her family, they kind of switch over to all scenes in soap operas where the character comes out to someone important in their lives within the soap operas, which those were a lot easier to kind of place because there's only so many queer characters on soap operas, so I knew exactly who to look for and what scenes to use. And then after, she has this big moment with her mom, it switches to major moments between soap opera character daughters and their mothers. So I knew exactly what I was looking for, and then I just kind of had to figure out what would work from there. So I did fall into like YouTube spirals of old soap opera episodes of, Erica Kane back in the day, and all these these moments that I hadn't watched live because they aired way before I was born, but I had known because they're just so, quintessential to what soap operas are. So I did fall down the rabbit hole and kind of have to watch soap opera scene after soap opera scene after soap opera scene, especially because my editor kept splitting chapters into 2 chapters. And at one point we accidentally created like 6 more chapters. So I was like, great, now I have to find 6 more scenes. And I feel like I'm already tapped out. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was probably the most fun research I've ever had to do, but it was definitely something that I'll remember just because I got to experience all these soaps that, meant a lot to me watching and knowing the histories of soap operas, but then being able to kind of place them in this book for 14-year-olds today who might have no idea.
Yeah, so then themselves can fall down a YouTube rabbit hole and try to find these scenes. Thank you. Yes, it reminded me of when I was a kid and watching soap operas with my mom and my grandma. So I recognized some of the names. I think those are all the questions that I have for you today. I want to thank each of you, Julie, Maria, Samantha, and Nicole, for taking time and joining us today. Thank you to HEC Media and the Novel Neighbor. And a reminder that you can order books through the novelneighbor.com and get special discounts if you purchase a bundle of the featured books from this panel. And there are more Teen Festival events available to watch, either on the library's Facebook page or on YouTube. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.